The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform, multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gabrokman-Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Miguel Adwin about his personal history with .NET, and how he has been a self-taught developer from the very earliest days of .NET all the way up until now. We also talked about why he picked a tech stack which is 90 to 96% .NET for his most recent project, fimi.market. Along the way, Miguel shares some absolute stellar pieces of advice for all developers, regardless of where they are on their journey, with a few perfect pieces of advice for juniors and those who are starting their journey right at the end of the episode, so definitely stick around for that. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, Miguel, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. I know that you are an incredibly busy person. Me, not so much these days, but that's my problem, not yours. And we're across pretty much all the time zones when we're talking. It's like 5 to 6 hours apart. This is wonderful. I love the internet.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Definitely. I've listened to you for quite some time, so it's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So for the folks who are tuning in, they'll have seen the episode title and stuff like that. But I was wondering, would you mind giving the folks who are listening a bit of an introduction to the work that you're doing and how you got into development and all that kind of stuff? Is that okay?
Yes, perfect. So hi, I am Miguel Adwin. I am the CEO of fimi.market Inc. We are a tech company focused on Web3. So we are in crypto, we are in NFTs, etc. A bit about me. I am Jamaican born and educated, raised, and that is the depth of my background, where a lot of my own beliefs come from. That is where I got interested in tech. That is where I was introduced to Microsoft technologies way back when the .NET Framework version 1 came out. And a few friends of mine got the first version on CDs, and I started tinkering around with it. Those days I was using ASP, using VB script, and this was a game changer. Because we weren't using, all these assemblies and stuff, and it was something completely different. That's when Visual Studio came out. So that was really the beginning of the love of the .NET framework. And fast forwarding now, quite a number of years later, we are no longer tied to Windows, and we are cross-platform, using different databases. It's a completely different world now in the .NET Framework ecosystem. So that's pretty much something about my tech life. I have always been an entrepreneur. I have always loved Microsoft technologies and used it as my go-to whenever I'm developing.
I like it. I like it. I remember my personal introduction to the .NET technologies was when I started at university, and they were like, right, before you can start doing any of your assignments or your homework, you need to download this 5 gigabyte set of ISOs. And once they're burnt to disks, you can install everything. And so that took about a week and a half. Compared to now, if you download the Visual Studio web installer, it's a couple hundred megabytes, and you run it, tick a few boxes, and it installs as it downloads, right? So it's like, this is brilliant. you could almost be working with it, and that's if you want to use Visual Studio, right? I tend to use Visual Studio Code for a lot of stuff because it's quite small.
I actually use Writer.
Oh, yeah. I use Rider a lot too, but when I'm working on something really small, like I'm throwing together a console app or something, I use Visual Studio Code because it's like one file, right?
True.
If I need like the refactorings of things and moving files around, then, Rider is my go-to experience. It's so much smaller and it has ReSharper built in, right? It's wonderful.
Amazing software. And I've been using Writer, as a matter of fact, since it came out also. I'm that early adopter kind of person. And when it works, I stick with it.
Absolutely. So I'm a contractor, right? And so I jump from client to client. The only problem I found is that clearing out Rider's internal cache of the code you just worked on, it's kind of hidden away, right? And when you click on the button, it just restarts the IDE, which is something that I need to do quite often as someone who jumps from client to client, right? I don't want to be taking a laptop to a client site and saying, here's your code, here's your project, and suddenly there's some other project that's cached somewhere, someone else's IP, right? So that gets a bit wobbly, but that happens with Visual Studio too. So it's like, you can't say that it's just a Rider problem, right?
Definitely.
Code's got to be cached somewhere, right?
Definitely. And you know what? One thing that is a minor annoyance for me with Writer still to this day is it doesn't handle very big files well. So if you open a large file, it will cripple your system. But I rarely do that. So it's neither here nor there. I just open it in Visual Studio Code and move on with life.
Sure, yeah. I found that as I've moved more towards microservices-based architecture, I don't open so many solutions that are huge these days because I tend to separate things out to like, here's a separate solution for that one microservice. And here's a different solution for a different microservice. And then that way, everything's sort of self-contained. But yeah, I can imagine that if you're working on, say, a Maui app or a huge N-tier architectured system with like domain-driven design everywhere and all that kind of stuff, it would very much slow down your system. So I can appreciate that.
Let me say this before I get angry emails from the JetBrains guys. They've improved that. So I have opened very large solutions and it's very, very quick now. I was actually referring to the fact that if you have a really big JSON file that you're opening, yes, the memory allocation doesn't work that great with that. But overall, JetBrains, you have written a fantastic product and improved it over time.
Right, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah. Yeah, I remember there was this project that I worked on years ago in the .NET Framework 3.0 days, where we had to deal with creating, parsing, and passing around really big XML files. And if I wanted to open up an XML file and edit it, I'd drop out of Visual Studio, like close Visual Studio, and open up Notepad++. Because at the time, opening the XML with Visual Studio, it would load loads of tools and it'd be like, let me visualize this for you. And I'd be like, no, I need to change the value of one property field. No, I could have changed this file, saved the file, recompiled the app, and shipped it in the time it's taking you to show me this visual tool. Oh, well. So you started with some VB script and some ASP and stuff like that, and you've migrated over to the .NET Framework and then followed it through with .NET Core and .NET 5, .NET 6, 7, whatever. I'd love to know if you have any opinions about how it's all changed, because I feel like you and I are of a similar vintage. And that's because we've seen it from the beginning. We've seen this like... So from my perspective, when people used to ask me, what is .NET Framework? I would say that it's something to allow you to do rapid application development, right? I feel like it's like .NET itself has had rapid application development throughout its life, right? It's had this process applied to it, whereas things like C++ is almost equally as old, but it's, and maybe I'm showing my biases here, but like C++ is really hard to use.
Well, you know what? My history. Well, let's talk about the vintage first. I remember back in the day, I was coding in Dreamweaver. Do you remember Dreamweaver? So Dreamweaver was my app of choice using ASP. And I remember we had the choice in ASP. It was either you choose VB script or JScript. And I chose VB script because I found that to be, an easier, more readable language, for me at least. And as a matter of fact, this was the first language I actually really started learning. And, we were using VB script, ASP, Microsoft SQL Server, running on IIS. Now, if we fast forward to .NET Framework coming out and they introduced C#, and you mentioned the fact that, C++ has been around for a while. I mean, let's give the C++ guys their credit, right? Everything is C++. You get your dues. But where usability is concerned and abstracting away a lot of those things, I think C# is king. So I actually started using C# when the .NET Framework came out, left VB script behind. It was a completely different world for me. But it's interesting. You can always tell when a company is throwing their weight behind a language. And you could see that C# was going to be the language of choice. And even though what they tried to do is they tried to placate everybody and actually came out with VB, with the .NET Framework. But as you could see, the community was so heavily weighted towards C#. It was kind of ridiculous. So if you were stuck in using VB, as the years ticked on, you actually got less and less community support, which is really beneficial when you have an ecosystem to be able to do some quick searches on how to do something and you're finding the solution in this different language. It's not very helpful for you. However, the beauty of .NET Framework is, and this is becoming a Microsoft commercial, the beauty of .NET Framework is when they came out with .NET Framework, we at that time, we could use both languages. So I could write an assembly in C# and I could consume it from VB. So we still had that little interoperability, which was a game changer. So now that we've gotten to .NET Core days, the holy grail, in my opinion, where we were, my laptop setup was always SQL Server. They had SQL Server Express, which you could use in your development environment. It was Visual Studio using C#. And when .NET Core came out, that's when I could kind of cut the Microsoft cord a little. So I started, because back in the day, you always had PHP developers, and I'm pretty proficient in PHP and their LAMP stack. And one thing that, as a Microsoft ecosystem developer, one thing that I envied was their ability to deploy apps in such a cheaper manner. And in such a faster manner also. And when .NET Core came out, and it opened up the world of Linux to me. So now I could actually deploy my software on Linux. I could actually use Nginx and not IIS. I could actually use different databases and everything runs performant and my code actually runs on Linux. This is fantastic. So what I personally did was I started moving away from SQL Server and I gravitated towards Postgres eventually, PostgreSQL. I lived some life with MySQL, MariaDB, which is pretty much MySQL anyway, and I tried a few others and I settled on Postgres, for the performance, the speed, memory management, etc. And that's really what my stack is now. I'm using .NET Core, C#, PostgreSQL as my database. And where hosting is concerned, I often host it on containers, or I just use Azure App Services.
And I think that's the important thing about the new .NET, right? Both .NET Core and .NET 5, 6, whatever you want to call it, there was something that Scott Hunter, who was at the time PM of .NET and all the other related things, in the first .NET community stand-up, when they were explaining what .NET Core was going to be, and it was called like VNext, .NET VNext at the time, Scott Hunter quite literally said, and I looked at Apollo, we were talking, I was listening, honest. because it's in one of the earliest episodes of the podcast. He said, Linux servers. I want you to host your apps on Linux servers. That's my goal. And there's something that I think Scott Hanselman constantly says in some of his videos. I think it was about 2 years ago. He released a video when he said, we fixed Notepad. So it stored your files as Unix compatible because there were some like Windows line ending characters that were not compatible with Linux and Unix. And since then, he's been saying, like, use .NET and use whatever application you like. If you want to use Visual Studio, do that. If you want to use Visual Studio Code, do that. Or if you want to use Rider, do that. Use what you like, which is a wonderful way to think about it because we're playing with Legos, right? And you don't have to use Microsoft's Legos. You can use Amazon's Legos, or you can use Google Legos, or you can use LampStack Legos. Obviously, it wouldn't be LampStack. So it would be your Linux.
That's not a word.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what they... Linux, Docker, .NET, and a database. So LDDD. If people start using that phrase right now in their conference talks, it's because of me.
Came from Jamie.
That's it. I'm only messing, folks. I'm only messing. I think that's one of the great things about this continual evolution of these tools. Like you were saying about how you could tell that Microsoft got behind C#, you can also tell that they've really gotten behind .NET. So for those of you that weren't around in the .NET framework timeframe, .NET Framework could only have updates released at the same time as Windows updates because Windows and .NET were so closely intertwined, to a point where, I believe, and I may be wrong about this, but I seem to remember Emo Landworth on an episode of .NET Rocks saying, yeah, the kernel requires the presence of .NET Framework, so .NET Framework isn't going away, ever. Or rather, .NET Framework isn't going anywhere anytime soon because Windows requires .NET Framework, right? That may change. I'm not a Microsoft employee and I don't represent them at all. But because of that, the evolution of .NET Framework slowed down. So every time that they made a change, they had to think there's 15 to 20 years of applications out there that require this change to not be there. So how do we test that? And how do we not break all of the Windows machines in the world ever? And so testing all of their code changes took loads and loads and loads of time. But now that we've separated from that model, .NET Core, or rather .NET, is now separated from Windows. So they can rapidly release whatever they want, whenever they want. Which I think, not necessarily for startups and entrepreneurs like yourself, but for big enterprises, I feel like that's really scary. So you're telling me that I've spent $1 million building my app, and now I've got to spend another $1 million next year.
I tell you what, though, the Mono, when Mono came out, that was actually what set us on this path. I know that one of the hardest things when we were deploying software back then was the fact that it was such a huge deployment. The file sizes were so huge. And, you know, when Microsoft decided to start taking a deep look at Mono and actually start integrating it, and they saw that they could actually do that decoupling where now we can build a modular framework. Right? So when they started pushing .NET Core, they started saying, only take in what you need, use what you need, versus the .NET Framework where you had this huge package and you needed almost everything to get your app to work. Now they said, okay, fine, here are these little bits. And if you're not using the security bit, then don't include it. And that cuts down on your file size so much greater than ever before. So I can thank the Mono guys for that. And as a matter of fact, I was also an early Mono user because I started with, who were they before? Before they became Xamarin, it was MonoTouch, right? And I coded using MonoTouch, and I found it fantastic. And I thought to myself that this is going to be the future. I didn't see Microsoft buying them. And I didn't see Microsoft actually, because Microsoft was never known as being open source. It was never known as being that company that would allow you to actually contribute. So it's really a completely different world now, and I love the direction they've gone in.
Yeah. It's another Hanselman quote, but he said something like, Microsoft and the enterprise, it's like an oil tanker. It turns, but it takes a long time to turn. And I feel like you're right. They're leaning towards this open source idea because they're not going to make any money out of .NET, right? And they never did make any money on .NET. Or rather, my assumption is that they never made any money with .NET. They used to make loads of money with Windows, and from the reports I've read recently, it's all about Xbox and Azure. So it makes sense that they're going to be like, hey, here's some tools to make your life easier. Just use them, and if you happen to host on Azure, fantastic. If you happen to also go out and buy an Xbox, also fantastic. Also, here's a bunch of stuff for free. Just use it. I feel like they would create this stuff internally anyway, right?
That's true. That's true. And as a matter of fact, fimi.market, we have an NFT marketplace as our first product, and we are completely hosted on Azure. So we use all Azure services currently.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So you've got fimi.market, which is an NFT marketplace. But like, did you have to go with .NET? I mean, I'm sitting here waving the .NET flag with number one fan on it saying, why did you go with .NET? But like, you were saying earlier on how you're proficient with PHP and envied the LAMP stack. But was there something about .NET and all that stuff where you were like, nope, it has to be .NET and C#, and I'm putting my foot down because I'm in charge?
Well, I'm waving the flag with you. I am right here waving the flag with you. So we always have choice. There's so much technology out there. There's so many stacks that you can put together. Being a C# lover and somebody who is very proficient in C#, it is my language of choice. I typically watch where Microsoft is going. And when I started loving the direction, I said, you know what, there's no way I'm leaving these guys. And, true to form, actually, they went ahead and they created yet another game changer in Blazor. And again, you've heard me say it again, I used the first version of Blazor. I used Blazor from before it actually came out to public use. And, it was a bit clunky. It was, still being built, but I saw where they were going with it. And I said to myself, at some point, when we get to Blazor in the browser using WASM, WebAssembly, I will definitely be there. And I am 100% going to build my first full WebAssembly software with it. So what happened was Blazor came out, and I actually built quite a number of applications using Blazor Server, since that was the first thing that was available. And you're familiar with Blazor Server, where it's actually a signaler connection to the server that changes the UI. And we were waiting for a bit until the client-side Blazor came out. And the client-side Blazor, in my mind, was going to fulfill the promise where I could actually leave a lot of my JavaScript work behind. There is nothing greater in my mind than being able to write C# for the browser, where you can do something as simple as, monitor a button click on the client side and actually do something. We kind of had this. Now, I know some people might be saying, yeah, but we could do that in .NET Framework with the on-click event. Yes, but this is so much better. So the NFT marketplace for fimi.market, whilst it is not my very first Blazor app, it is actually the largest enterprise WebAssembly Blazor app that I have written. And I chose C# because it was competent. It could definitely, I know that it could tie in to my ecosystem. I know that it could provide the end user with the speed and security that we needed. So if you actually visit it, you'll see how fast it is, because, and I'm not going to say it is that fast only because of Blazor. Because if you take a look at the majority of of single page apps. Single page apps tend to be much faster because all you're doing is making API calls, etc. But just imagine as a .NET developer being able to create, I would say 90%, maybe even 90 plus percent of your code base is written in C#, and it's running in the browser, and you're doing client-side coding. Because for anybody who's familiar with Web3 and crypto, we still use JavaScript libraries on the client. However, the way that we've architectured it, all the calls to Web3 are so small, really, that the majority of the work is done using the API, using C# in the background. So there was really, it was a no-brainer for me to choose C#. And the way that our setup is we use C# integrating with TypeScript. So TypeScript has been my language of choice now for some time because it really does take my stupid brain out of making JavaScript mistakes. There is nothing worse than chasing down a JavaScript error. So TypeScript definitely helps with that. So we use TypeScript, making calls from the client through to the .NET code. The .NET code also making calls to the client through to the Web3 code for certain bits of information. And it's a marriage. It's a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, it should never be discounted how much more productive you can be in the tools that you already know. And being able to continue to do web development with what was traditionally a server-side language and still achieve the same goals, it's mind-blowing. Because you said yourself that you sometimes have issues switching into JavaScript because there are things that it does that no other programming languages, well, they don't really do, or maybe they don't do in the same way, right? And my friend Zach always says that people make fun of JavaScript because it doesn't do X and it doesn't do Y, and that's because they were approaching it from an object-oriented programming language background, or something like that. And that's totally fair, right? The same thing could be said for C, and could be said for Go, and could be said for insert programming language of the day, name, year, right? It could be any one of those languages. If you're approaching it with a certain mindset, you're going to have a bad time. But if you're able to approach the problem that you're solving with the tools you already have and be able to use those tools, then you're going to be much more productive. And I really like that. It's like, I can't think of a metaphor now. I'm usually pretty good at metaphors. If you're doing some kind of woodwork and you have a saw and you're used to using a particular saw, being able to use that same saw on different types of wood, you can probably cut the wood really quickly. I mean, that was a really bad metaphor, but hopefully it gets the point across, right?
And that's what they've provided us. That is something that we have always wanted. Because right now, our Microsoft world is so much richer than what we, I don't want to say grew up with, because that sounds weird, but, the world that we live in now is I can use C# and I use it to write my API. I use it to write my client-side code. I use it to build my mobile app with Xamarin. I can use C# pretty much all over the place right now to get almost all bits of my interface and bits of my product written. And I can do it cheaply using some Linux boxes. This is the golden age as far as I'm concerned for .NET developers.
Absolutely. Can you imagine going back 15 years and saying to your younger self, don't worry, literally everything we do in 15 years' time will be C#?
No.
It would blow your own mind, right? It's pretty cool. Yeah, Blazor, Xamarin, all these different technologies, they're just like, I read the other day that if you're running .NET Core 3.1 on a Linux machine, you're actually running on the Mono runtime, not a .NET runtime, which makes sense when you think about it. I mean, why would you rewrite it just for Linux? But I was like, mind blown. I was like, really? We're still using this technology that Miguel de Icaza first shipped in 2006 or 2007?
Yes, sir.
I can't remember exactly what it was, though. And Blazor is actually running on a mono runtime.
Yes.
It's mad.
Yeah, when they started experimenting with Blazor, that's exactly where they went to, right to the mono framework. So I am thankful to Miguel, my namesake, for that, because I've followed his career for a while, and he's a genius.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that fimi.market is around 90% .NET? Because you said that there's some TypeScript in there, right?
Yes, easily about that. The majority of the code that I write, I'm sitting in C#. And right now, really, with WebAssembly, what the recommended approach is to try to minimize the coupling of JavaScript with UI changes as much as possible. And so I do attempt to strictly follow that. I say attempt because we're developers, sometimes we just have to do some stuff, but if you understand it, the things that you can get away with without, having a change engine issue. So really the majority of the marketplace is in fact written in C#. I'm very happy for that, because what that means is the developers within the company use their skill set that they're most familiar with. And the idea, if anybody who has written in multiple languages, I can tell you, if I get a PHP project, because I also consult like you, Jamie, occasionally, and if I get a PHP project, I have to switch my mind. I have to get my mind geared up, because the moment I decide to put my finger to the keyboard, I'm gonna type nonsense. So you have to get your mind into that mode. So I can tell you, I've worked on, when we're looking at SPA frameworks, I've used Aurelia, which was, Knockout JS is what it was before it became Aurelia. And I decided to choose Knockout because of how easy it was, really. Now, when you're taking a look at either using Aurelia or what is really the most popular now? Is it Angular? Is Angular still the most popular?
From my perspective, I would say it's about a 50-50 split between Angular and React.
And React, yeah.
Maybe that betrays the types of projects I've been working on, though. I don't know. Write in and let us know, folks.
Yeah, so when I used to write code using SPAs, and then I'd have to switch because you already know that depending on how you write your code, you're possibly using web forms at some point, loading that up, jumping over to the SPA framework, writing in JavaScript or TypeScript, then coming back over. So you're dealing with your regular HTML, you're dealing with your JavaScript, you're dealing with your C#, and who knows what else that you have to learn in the background. So your brain is actually working so much harder in developing this one application. Now I can do all that using C#. Razor syntax and C# and I'm good to go.
This episode of the .NET Core podcast is supported in part by Zoom Platform. Zoom Platform. No, not the video conferencing app. Zoom-platform.com. The premier DRM-free games portal. Unlike directionless larger stores, Zoom operates more like a boutique, offering all-time classics such as Duke Nukem, exclusive hidden gems like Hard War, and innovative indies like Wrecker Sunken Land. Zoom will even take requests and hunt games down for you. When Zoom signs titles, they make sure to get every release, version, language, you name it. That's how Zoom carves its niche. Zoom hand scans box art, manuals and other bonus content, and even records soundtracks. On top of all of this, Zoom always makes a point of securing the rights to obscure expansion packs and mods. When you buy the Zoom Platform edition of a game, you know you are getting the most complete and definitive edition. Zoom's staff and technology are best in class. In fact, When competitors can't get a game running on modern hardware, they go directly to Zoom. They're some of Zoom's best customers. Zoom provides unparalleled 24/7 customer service and closeness with its user base. Zoom's management interacts directly with customers via Discord. They take their small business approach very seriously. Zoom-platform.com, your friendly neighborhood DRM-free game store. And if you end up on the Discord server, look me up because I'm in there too. It's amazing, yeah. I feel like it makes me more productive because, like you say, you're not having to context switch across different languages. You could make the argument that you're supposed to know JavaScript because you're a .NET developer, or that you're supposed to know this and you're supposed to know that. Well, guess what? Some people don't. And some amazing people are doing the mental gymnastics required to leap from one programming language or framework over to another. Like you said, it's quite taxing and it really tires you out. And some people just can't do it. And that's not me saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just that some people can't do it. I feel bad for those people. I'm not trying to draw attention to those people, though. But being able to do just about everything in one language, in one framework, I mean, that's why we have the same thing with Node.js, right? They can live on the server, and you could build an app that runs in your browser. It's exactly the same idea.
Exactly.
One language in both places. But I think that .NET and C# take that to the extreme, right? Their whole thing was one code base everywhere. And I'm pretty sure that if I build something using Blazor or .NET MAUI, that I can run it almost anywhere. I mean, I use a Linux desktop, so I can't run .NET MAUI there. But I've been told that it's on the way.
Exactly.
We are literally one language anywhere.
The hybrid apps are where it's at. And as a matter of fact, the decision that we made with Fimi and the NFT marketplace is we decided to make it a progressive web app. And so right now you can actually, you drop the icon on your desktop, it loads within its own context. The one thing that is missing, I think, to make PWAs really stand out, and it's an iOS issue mainly, and they're working on that, is push notifications. And I can see that there is some hint in the code base for the next version where push notifications will be enabled. And that now will be another game changer for progressive web apps, because I particularly love not needing to write something for the App Store that it really doesn't need to go in the App Store. You can install it on your desktop. You can start using it. Done.
And yeah, I have this discussion with some juniors and people who are starting their journey in development a lot, where they're like, but I want to learn web. I want to make a desktop app and I want to make a video game. And I'm like, you could totally do those things, but also it will be using the web, right? You just need to know what an HTTP GET request is, what a POST request is, maybe just know that gRPC exists, know what a PWA is, and you're done. Go make your app, go make a game, go make your whatever. But they need to know these things exist because at some point in their future, they'll be using them.
Well, you know what? I'll add some information to what you just said for them. Unity, using C#, exporting to WebGL, everything runs on the web. No problems at all Microsoft.
Absolutely. And as far as I'm aware, you can do that in Rider on Linux as well.
There you go. Because Rider integrates perfectly with Unity.
It does. So let's talk a little bit more about fimi.market. So you've got Blazor WebAssembly running in the browser, communicating with JavaScript when you need to. You've got .NET technically on the server and the client, and you've said that you're running Postgres. So again, I'm waving the Microsoft flag a little bit. Why Postgres versus, say, SQL Server? Is it just that SQL Server is big and slow? Or
I mean, what? I didn't say it, but...
I mean, he's really good at what he does, right? And I think, just before you answer you real quick, I think that a lot of developers need to experience the different database engines. I'm not sure if that's the right word or not. These different database technologies to be able to understand the differences, right?
Okay, so SQL Server is what and I'm going to use the term this time, that's what we grew up with as Microsoft developers. And we always knew it was big. We always knew it was expensive. So as a solutions architect and a problem solver, when you actually went to a business, one of the things that they had to consider, what is the license for my Windows server? And then after they consider the license for the Windows server, they have to consider, okay, so what's the license for the database, which is Microsoft SQL Server. And before you know it, they have hit several thousands of dollars. And I personally, so like I said, I was born and raised in Jamaica. So there is a kind of different system of economics there. And, however, it's similar. I live in North America now. I live in the USA now. And small businesses, for example, still have issues with spending several thousands of dollars on your operating system plus your database. And that's just for start. So consider being in a developing country where somebody wants to expand their business, add technology into their infrastructure. And you're saying, for example, well, your initial outlay has to be $6,000 or $10,000 before you even get moving. So that never ever sat right with me. And we needed a way to provide technology to those who actually are business leaders. They are helping, they're adding to the GDP of the country. But how can they do that if they have these roadblocks, the roadblocks to entry in and of itself? So the moment and we always had LAMP stacks, but I was a Microsoft developer. Now, when we started getting the option of branching out for databases, I immediately took it. Now, before we get emails about the fact that, well, you always had SQL Express. Yes, but SQL Express had limits. I think the first version, was it 1 gig and then 4 gigs per file? So you always had those little limits that you had to work with. And yes, a small business could use SQL Express, but they'd still need a license for the operating system. So fast forward now, we are talking about being able to use Linux, which is free. We are able to choose a database, and you mentioned, several databases out there. So let's just talk about some of the most popular ones, open source ones that people use. You have MySQL, and you have Postgres SQL. You have Maria, which is pretty much MySQL anyway. I tried all of them because I believe in knowing your tools so that you can make the right decisions. And I decided to settle on Postgres. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. The reason I decided to settle on Postgres was actually not it's not MySQL's fault at all. I was doing a project in .NET Core 3 or was it 2.1? Was it 2? Yeah. I'm trying to remember. And their MySQL driver, what I was doing, it was causing all kind of madness for my code. And every transaction was taking so much longer to process. And at the time, I was under the gun and I needed a solution. And I was like maybe 60% of the way through a project. But the queries I started writing suddenly started blowing up. And I tracked it down to the implementation of the driver itself. And so I had to make a decision. Do I try to fix this? Do I wait on a fix? What am I going to do? Or do I take another look at some other engines? And this is where the beauty of EF Core, transforming from when we always had entity framework from .NET Framework days. So I've been using this code, so I'm familiar with it. And what I decided to do was I started taking a look around and I landed on Postgres, gave it a try. And, kind of like what we spoke about earlier, the modularity of .NET Core, I was able to just swap that out using EF Core code first, because I've always been EF Core code first. So all I had to do was migrate my schema onto Postgres, seed my database, run my tests, work like a charm, and I just kept moving. This is not something we could have done back in the day. And so the speed of iterating through software is so much better now with .NET Core. I absolutely love it. And, like I said, it was no fault truly of MySQL, but I started using Postgres. It was so fast. It was so lean. It was so small. And I never looked back.
To be fair, everyone I've talked to who's used Postgres for something, for a personal project or some big enterprise thing, they've said, Jamie, you need to really be looking into Postgres. One of my friends said, I don't care what your next project is, you're doing it in Postgres. Maybe I'll look into it. But you're absolutely right. The wonderful idea of just swapping, you were saying that you have this .NET app which is talking to Entity Framework Core, and there's a driver layer that talks directly to your database of choice. Swap that driver layer out and everything still works.
Perfectly.
I love that. It's wonderful.
Now, there are little nuances, right? But the nuances aren't so much that it's a deal breaker. It's kind of like just syntax. It's like the difference in Postgres, for example, is that when you're running a query, the case does matter. So for example, you're coming from your SQL Server days. You don't really care that much about the case. But when you're running I-like queries on Postgres, you definitely need to care about the case. And those are just little nuances that you have to know.
Sure, and those things you can pick up with experience as you go along, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to relearn how databases work. You don't have to rewrite huge swathes of code. Like you say, you just have to make sure your queries line up with the things that Postgres cares about.
Yeah.
Then you're done.
Yes. Jamie, you know what? When we started using EF Core, I remember I'm the guy who I usually write my own libraries to make my future development easier. And I remember that I used to write views and then map the views in EF Core so that I could have a representation of the data that I wanted using my Microsoft SQL Server. That was an easy way to do it, and of course, when Entity Framework came out, we still had the idea of using stored procedures. We were very much still reliant on using stored procedures, etc. And, the convention was, well, use the stored procedures because it will compile on the server and it will be much faster, etc. This is what we grew up with. And I can tell you, the only time I write queries now is when I use JetBrains Data Grip. And that is the only time I write queries. In my code, I never touch SQL. But yes, Data Grip is awesome.
I feel like we've started gushing over JetBrains here. But Data Grip is amazing. If you haven't used it, you need to. It's an IDE for your database.
For everything.
You got a JSON file? I don't know. Yeah, okay. And you said in our chat before we did the recording that there is a CMS in there, and that it's Piranha CMS.
It is.
Now, I know that there are loads of .NET CMSs. If I came to you and said, Miguel, my friend, please help me. I need to pick a CMS for my .NET-based application. Should I go with Umbraco? Should I go with Sitecore? Or should I go with... I saw the glimmer of worry in your eyes when I said Sitecore then. Should I go with Piranha? How do I go about figuring out the answer?
Oh, man.
As a man of experience, was it just... we went with Piranha because it's our choice and we're the best? I mean, is that what you did?
Well, you know what? Let me just welcome some more hate mail then. Why don't I? Why did I choose Piranha? It took me some time to actually make that decision. I've been writing my own CMS for years, and I typically custom write it, and iterate on that version throughout the years. And as a guy who writes everything himself, Jamie, I know that you can attest to this fact, because it means that you have full control over the code base. You know what's in it, you know what's not in it, etc. And deep in my brain, though, I always knew that I couldn't do that forever, because as your workload increases and you take a look at actually iterating your CMS, updating it, etc., you find that your time that you're spending doing that could be spent doing something else. And I've always been, knowledgeable of these other CMSs. As a matter of fact, I remember I tried .NET Nuke was the very first one you remember that? .NET Nuke was the very first one that I tried way back when. And I was impressed by it, but it had the same issue I always have with CMSs, and this is from WordPress on PHP, etc. It seems like this massive titan of a ship when all I need is to pull some data in. I rarely ever need everything that this thing provides. And so your question about how do you go about choosing the CMS, you ask yourself, what is it that you actually need? So the first thing is, I literally only need the data to display on some pages. That's all I need. And how do I need to frame this data? Do I need images? Do I need to add a gallery? What kind of features do I need in a rich text editor? Do I need to add polls to the site, etc.? And because knowledge of where you want to go will help you in making your decision on your tooling. And knowledge of the tooling will help you in not choosing the wrong tooling. And so after I took a look, I decided a headless CMS was going to be the direction. I don't need anything too big, needed to run on X software, etc., with the integration. And yes, I did take a look at Umbraco. I took a look at a bunch of them. The reason I chose Piranha was Piranha's simplicity. And simplicity works for me. When I personally looked at Piranha, I thought in my head, this is something I would have written. And that's why I chose it. I took a look at how their design around extending Piranha is, because you can extend Piranha easily. And yes, I know you can extend Umbraco, you can extend .NET Nuke, etc. But just how small the implementation is. When you pull down the default project for Piranha, for example, it is, what is it? It's like 10 files, 10 custom files that you can actually go in and start modifying. And it has a built-in blog. It has built-in where you have regular pages. And so you can have sub-menus within that. You can have a blog where you have an actual archive system. So, for example, we were running a blog on WordPress before, and I'm transitioning that over to using Piranha. And it is so much faster. And as a matter of fact, let's dip back into Postgres. I'm actually using Piranha CMS with Postgres SQL, and I'm storing the blobs on Azure to keep them off the actual web server, So it's nice. It's nice. It's headless. It's fast. It's easy.
I like it. There was something there that you said about knowing that other tools are out there and applying that knowledge to the problem that you're facing, right? And my personal opinion is that someone who is a senior developer or higher has enough knowledge of the tools that are available such that they can go in and say, well, we could use this technology, but I can foresee that in 6 months' time, we'll have this problem. Because we had the same problem when I was building Project X for client Y, and we did exactly the same thing. Is that breadth and depth of experience. Being able to say, yes, okay, SQL Server is going to cost you a lot of money in licensing, and then you're going to want to bring in a consultant to drop the price of that licensing by making it more optimized. I'm pretty sure it's still a thing, actually, that you can get paid like thousands of dollars per day by going into a big enterprise and saying, right, I can optimize your SQL Server. because $2,000 across 2 days is worth way more than the $25,000
Truth.
at the end of the year for the server, right?
Truth. And you know what? It all begins with curiosity, Jamie. You have to be curious. And that's one thing that has served me well throughout my career. I am self-taught. I remember when I started coding, and I chose ASP, it was actually, I saw my friends using it, right? And I thought it was cool. And I went, hey, show that to me, but you won't get much further without somebody actually pushing and guiding you if you don't have that curiosity. And you won't learn the tools unless you have that curiosity. So I have a friend who I often tell him, if you want to make sure that you can be the best at this thing, when you get it, you need to start, you take it, you twist it, you open it, you look inside it, and you just go through everything. You create a solution in your head to just write some software, right? It doesn't have to be anything that makes any sense either, but you have to start using it so that at the point when you actually need to use it for your career, then you have the experience personally already that you can go, oh, like you said, Jim, it's like, oh, I know this. I haven't encountered this before. This is going to lead to this conundrum later on. Let's not go down that road.
And I can attest to that idea of curiosity. One of the things that my dad used to do when I was growing up, those old rotary phones? The ones where you'd brrr, one, brrr, two. Well, he bought one of those, gave me a screwdriver and said, take it to pieces.
There you go.
And put it back together. Now, it wasn't the world's greatest experience as a 6-year-old trying to take a phone to pieces or indeed putting it back together again. But it was that idea of which way around does a screw go? Is it lefty-loosey, righty-tighty? And then the back plate comes off and you're like, holy moly, what's all this stuff? There's all these cables and bits and pieces in that. And you can totally do the same thing with open source technology, right? You could just go to, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, wherever it's hosted, pull down the source code, run it locally, stick a breakpoint somewhere and go, oh, cool, that's how it works.
That's how it works.
I think that's one of the great things about open source and the open source revolution is that you can do that. You just pull down the code, you jump in and say, how does this work? Oh, cool, that's how it works. But the only problem I find is that you can't really ask someone why they've chosen to do that. Because if you have a large enough community that's around a single project, there's no one person that you can ask, but why did you do it that way? For instance, in React, right? Why are React hooks engineered the way they are?
Mm-hmm.
You have to go hunting around the internet and hope that someone has written a blog post. Oh, we did it this way because... But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You see, I was going to ask you your top tip for anyone getting into the industry, but I think you just answered it.
There's another bit I could add to that and say, be patient with yourself, because what gives you struggle now, what you struggle with now, isn't necessarily what you're going to struggle with next year. And experience, the definition of it is such that, you really have to be using it so that the synapses in your brain start connecting in such a way and firing off that next year it's like second nature. I'll give you an example similar to your taking apart the phone example. When I was younger, I received a train, the train sets with the real smoke. And I remember I was maybe around 4, 5, 6 or so, because I started pulling stuff up way early. And I had been pulling that train up to figure out, where on earth is the smoke coming from? I couldn't figure it out. And I would be running it and I'd be over it, smelling it. And I'm like, this smells like real smoke. How are they doing this? And I'm going to be honest with you. I pulled apart that train for years. And it was something that I could take that train apart and I could put it back together without even thinking. And I kept doing it because I could not figure it out. And I remember one year, I don't remember how old I was, but I had gained enough knowledge about life and how heat works and how oil, grease works and how it interacts, etc. That one day I pulled that train up, Jamie, and I went, And remember, this is something I'd done tens, 20, maybe 100 or so times. And I was just dumb to it. And then one day I opened it and I went, there you go. And I never pulled that train apart again. That was it. Mission accomplished. So one day it will click, so just keep going. Just keep at it.
I think that's really important too. In my opinion, you need to have a certain amount of drive as well as curiosity. And like you said, you need to have a support network, a teacher or a mentor or something. Someone you could turn to and say, I'm stuck and I don't quite get it. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that people who have listened to the show for a long time will know, that I was a maths teacher. Straight out of uni, there were no jobs. So I took teacher training and became a maths teacher. And I used to tell the students, I don't care how stupid you think you're going to feel, ask the question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask, because then you don't know why it didn't work. And if you don't know why, then you might not understand. And I told them that even if they wanted to take me to one side and say, Jamie, I'm a bit stuck, and just whisper it to me, I don't care. We'll figure it out. But when it gets tough, and some parts of development, programming, coding, whatever you want to call it, are super tough. You were saying that you were working with Blazor right out of 0.1, right? And you've got Xamarin and Postgres in the mix. All these different things that you've leapt to. You've got all these different things that are vaguely new to you, or you are right at the bleeding edge. And times are going to get tough. And you need to be able to have the drive to go, it's tough, and I will crack this eventually. And having that drive is so important. You can actually come back to a tough part and go, nope, I will do it today. I will get some help and I'll figure it out. And I think that's as important as curiosity and having a mentor, because regardless of where you are in your career, you can have someone who's one or two steps past where you are and have them give you the benefit of their experience. And guess what? Sometimes it's free.
I'll tell you a story on that, on having a mentor. I have a friend, Harold Campbell, and he was, when I started working with him, I saw him like a wizard. His grasp of the .NET framework was just so light years beyond mine. I couldn't imagine myself getting to his level. But, he became a very, he's a very close friend of mine. And he actually stopped using .NET code for quite some time. And I've been trying to bring him back to the fold because, I'm trying to explain that it's not the same old Microsoft, But what Harold taught me is be patient with somebody who wants to learn. I was nowhere near his level. And to be quite honest, where I am at now and how quickly I was able to ramp up with .NET Framework at the time, it's all due to him. He was patient. He showed it to me. He showed me things that just looked like magic, but now it's things that I do like without even thinking, so it's always good to have somebody. They talk about pair programming, but it's one thing to have a peer. It's another thing to have somebody who is just light years ahead of you, who is able to look at you and say, look, I'm going to teach you this. You learn so much faster. And if they are patient and kind enough, you can become so much greater than you ever thought you could.
I like it. I mean, that's the nugget of the episode right there, I think. I can't. Miguel laughing. I can't really say anything else. I'm worried about ruining it. So remind the folks about fimi.market and let them know how they can maybe get in touch with you. Maybe they can get in touch with you if they have questions. Listeners can just send them to me if they like, and I'll send them on to you. I don't mind.
Absolutely. You can reach out to us on Twitter. Our Twitter is fimi_market. That's FIMI_MARKET. You can reach out to me. My email is madwin Madwin. We like to make fun and say Madwin. So it's madwin at fimi.market. Reach out to me anytime, really. If it's just about information, absolutely. However, we are in the Web3 space, and we do have an NFT marketplace where we are championing for underrepresented artists and people who actually do not know anything about the crypto space, where you mention NFTs to them and they have no clue what you're talking about. What we're trying to do is make sure that developing countries and communities that need the opportunity get it. And so that's actually why Fimi Market was created, to make sure that that gap, that knowledge gap doesn't exist where crypto is concerned, because a lot of developing nations and people from the diaspora, etc., have missed out on technology and have missed out on their ability, the opportunity to earn a living with the talents that they have, their creative talents. And personally, I am tired of hearing the adage of the struggling artist. You have all this talent and yet you're struggling. So that's a part of the reason, we're trying to provide opportunity and education for underserved communities.
I like it. So yeah, get in touch with Miguel and check out fimi.market. And if you know someone who can benefit from fimi.market's position and power, then let them know. I love that. I mean, I don't have the power myself, but being able to talk to someone who can say, let's take this group who, for whatever reason, are underrepresented and give them the power to proceed with their lives and increase their enjoyment. And I'm worried about saying quality of life. I mean, I don't want to, but it's right? If I as a person, or you as a person, or someone else as a person has the ability to create a thing and sell it for some value of money, then guess what? You've just increased the quality of someone's life. Let's do this. Let's help people. That's why a lot of us got into this business in the first place, right? We're in the business of problems and make a little bit of money, sure, but my personal thing is that I'm here to help people when I can. So let's do this.
I'm with you, Jamie. I'm with you. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, definitely check out fimi.market. I'll make sure that the links are all in the show notes so you don't have to worry about, oh gosh, what was that link again? So definitely check out the show notes. There'll be a summary of them in your podcatcher, or whatever you're listening on, and it will have the links in there, and the full show notes will have a transcription and all of the links in there as well. So don't worry about, I'm driving, how am I going to write all this down? Don't worry about it. I've got you covered. But what I will say, Miguel, is thank you ever so much for spending this time with me. I know it's the beginning of your day, so you've had to start your day by listening to me rambling on at you in my horrible, laconic, nerdy voice. But I really appreciate you taking this time with me and the listeners. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity, Jeremy. I will continue listening as I've always listened to you.
I mean, maybe we can pair the show up with some underrepresented artists and help them to create and sell some .NET Core NFTs, right? Why not?
Hey, listen, Jamie, if you take a look at our marketplace, you'll find such a myriad of artists. We can definitely get something happening for you. And we're launching a virtual gallery soon, so you never know.
Yeah, I like it. Well, thank you very much, Miguel.
Thank you. Have a good one.
That was my interview with Miguel Adwin. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that. Or reach out via our contact page. That's at .netcore.show/contact. And of course, come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.